There was a certain chill in the way his footsteps echoed down the corridor of the Phoenix headquarters, measured deliberate and just a bit too loud against the polished terrazzo floor. He didn't nod at the front desk clerk, didn't greet the janitor who was mopping near the elevator, just breezed through the lobby with his black briefcase like he was walking into a company he already owned. Technically, he did. Derek Langston. The freshly installed CEO, mid-30s, all ambition and polished confidence, had been appointed just days before announced in one of those slick internal memos filled with phrases like new era and strategic leadership realignment. I'd seen a dozen of those in my 19 years here. I knew exactly what that memo meant. Somebody at the top wanted change, and the axe usually fell on those without a corner office. From my perch in a small sun-drenched room on the fourth-floor Operations South Wing, I watched him through the glass. My role wasn't glamorous, but it was essential, and far enough away from the chaos of junior staff and midday brainstorm sessions that I could actually think. Derek didn't bother knocking. He walked in and out of rooms mid-sentence, carried a tablet everywhere, took notes without context, asked questions and didn't wait for full replies. He smiled when someone stammered. Not with cruelty, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had already made up his mind. He didn't come looking for me. Not that day. Probably didn't know I existed. That was fine. At lunch, a few of us long-timers gathered in the back kitchen, the kind with coffee that's always burnt, and cabinets that don't quite close. Someone joked that the new CEO reminded her of a summer camp director who thought he'd invented team spirit. We chuckled quietly. I sipped my mint tea and said nothing. I'd survived 4 CEOs already. Each one thought they were different. Each one made the same mistake they believed leadership came from PowerPoint decks and buzzwords. Later that day, I passed Derek in the hallway. He glanced at my badge, then looked straight through me. I was invisible, but something in the air told me not for long. The office had gone quiet in that eerie, unnatural way that says more than words ever could. Conversations faded when you walked by. Middle managers kept their heads down and their doors half closed. And Claire, the HR director, who used to bring in homemade banana bread every other Friday, had looked pale all week like she hadn't slept in days. I shut the door to my office gently and sank into my chair. There's a certain stillness that settles over a place just before everything changes. I'd felt it before, and I was feeling it now. The next week crept by like water under a warped floorboard, silent, slow, but relentless. No public announcements, no terminations posted to the internal bulletin. Just meetings held behind glass walls and hush-hush conversations that stopped cold whenever someone in a suit passed by. I did what I always did. Kept moving. Finalized a logistics report for our Singapore supplier. Coordinated time zones for the next call with Eastern Dynamics in Hong Kong. Sent off another carefully worded email in Mandarin to smooth over a payment discrepancy. I didn't see Derek much, but I heard about him constantly. He floated through departments like a weather front, brisk, sudden, unsettling. He smiled just enough to unsettle people. Some laughed nervously when he spoke. Most just watched their backs. Then the cuts started. Longtime managers, people who knew the operations inside and out, began disappearing. Quiet meetings, no warnings. Empty cubicles followed. No emails, no send-offs. Just cardboard boxes and secondhand stories. And just like that, in came the replacements. Derek's people. Young, confident, and clueless. Their resumes sparkled. Their buzzwords did too. But in meetings, they stumbled over acronyms we'd used for years. They made jokes about paper files and called our vendor system prehistoric. They called it innovation. I called it a slow-motion implosion. I kept quiet. I'd learned that lesson before. Leaders like Derek mistook silence for agreement, never realizing it was just self-preservation. It wasn't until Thursday's department meeting that I truly saw the storm forming. Derek stood at the head of the room, running through slide after slide with speed and arrogance. "We need to streamline," he said. "Strategic partnerships only. No dead weight." He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. I already knew I was next. When the meeting wrapped, the room emptied in a slow shuffle. Nobody lingered. Nobody made small talk. I gathered my notes with practiced precision, neither the first to leave nor the last. That kind of timing mattered now. As I stood, I felt someone step up beside me. "Elaine Monroe," the voice said, pausing like he was trying to place the name on a company chart. "Yes," I replied, without offering to help. Derek Langston gave me that bland, polished smile he reserved for everyone he didn't think he'd need twice. "What exactly is it you handle again?" I could have given him my title. I could have rattled off the years of coordination partnerships, risk mitigation, and late-night calls bridging international time zones, but none of it would land with someone like him. "I manage our communications with Eastern Dynamics and our other key partners across Asia," I said evenly. He frowned, trying to remember if that mattered. "We've got someone on translation, don't we?" "I don't just translate," I replied, my voice steady. "I maintain the relationship. Cultural navigation, etiquette, expectations, negotiations. It's a bit more involved." He nodded, already turning toward the door. Right. Good. We'll be streamlining some of that. Appreciate the work you're doing." And just like that, he was gone. I stood in the now empty room, the overhead lights humming like an old refrigerator. A familiar chill settled in my chest. He didn't understand. Worse, he didn't care to. Outside the office had a frantic rhythm. Phones ringing a little too loud, keyboards clattering a little too fast, and tension crackling in the air like the start of monsoon season. Linda from HR caught my eye as I passed her desk. She offered a soft, sympathetic smile, the kind that came with unspoken warnings. Back at my desk, I opened a draft to Mr. Liang at Eastern Dynamics. A standard update, but halfway through, I hesitated. How long would I be allowed to keep even this up? By Friday morning, the clouds outside were low and thick. The building was hushed. At 10:15, my inbox chimed. Meeting, 10:30 a.m. Derek Langston, Conf Room C. No subject, no reason, just like all the others. I rose, slowly straightened my collar, and walked to the room. Deliberate, calm, like someone walking into a storm she'd seen coming a mile away. Linda didn't look at me when I walked in. Her eyes stayed fixed on the notepad in front of her fingers, laced tight in her lap. Derek gestured to the chair across from him like a waiter offering a table no one had reserved. "Elaine, good to see you," he said with the sterile cheerfulness of a man checking boxes. "Please have a seat." I sat down, back straight, hands folded neatly on the table. He opened a navy folder, scanned the first page, and launched in. "We've been reviewing our internal structure the past few weeks, and after careful analysis, we've decided to consolidate a number of functions." He said like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. He didn't look at me when he added, "Your role, while important historically, no longer aligns with where we're headed. The firm we've partnered with for global language services will handle the necessary functions moving forward." I didn't interrupt. I didn't flinch. I was past the part where this could surprise me. Past bargaining. This wasn't personal. It was careless. Derek gave a tight-lipped smile as if trying to soften the blow with charm he didn't possess. "We really do appreciate your years of service. HR has put together a very fair severance package, 2 months' pay, and your unused vacation time." Linda slid the beige envelope toward me. I didn't touch it. Derek leaned back, mistaking my silence for shock. "I understand this may come as a transition, but change is how we grow." I tilted my head slightly. Not angry, not even bitter, just disappointed. "You're sure you can manage without me?" I asked, voice even. He gave a soft laugh, brushing it off. "We'll be fine. Streamlining is necessary. It's nothing personal." I stood, leaving the envelope on the table, and for the first time, I really looked at him. Not the title, not the suit, but the man. A boy, really. Pretending. "Well then," I said calmly. "Good luck on Monday." He blinked at that. Just briefly. But then came the confident smile again. "Thank you, Elaine. Best of luck to you too." I walked out without a glance back. Past Linda's silent apology, past the gray faces behind cubicles. Outside, the sky had darkened, and the rain had finally begun. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands wrapped tight around the steering wheel. Outside, the rain carved soft lines down the windshield, blurring the parking lot into a hazy watercolor. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. What I felt was something stranger grief, yes, but also a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. They thought they could replace me. Thought a contract with a nameless agency could match 2 decades of cultural fluency, intuition, and trust. They thought they were prepared. They weren't, and Monday would prove it. And if you're the kind of person who believes the story doesn't end when they think you've been written off, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. The next chapter is just beginning. The weekend passed in near silence. I cleaned out my little home office, dusted the bookshelf, reorganized the spare bedroom. A few former colleagues texted the braver ones. Others stayed silent, keeping their heads down. I didn't blame them. By Sunday night, I had updated my resume. Not because I was panicking, because I was practical. 21 years had given me more than a job title. I had built something: credibility, deep-rooted relationships, cross-cultural trust that didn't vanish with a click of Derek Langston's pen. Monday morning arrived gray and humid. I put on a crisp navy blouse, comfortable slacks, and slipped a tidy leather portfolio under my arm. At 9:30, I walked into Whitman and Hale Global Advisors, just 6 blocks from my old office. A colleague I'd met years ago at a logistics summit had reached out after hearing what happened. Their team needed someone who could do more than speak Mandarin. They needed someone who could read the room, navigate the space between words. The interview felt like something from another world. Pointed questions, professional respect. Mr. Hale himself shook my hand, looked me in the eye, and actually listened. When I got home that afternoon, an offer was already waiting in my inbox. Better pay, more freedom, real respect. I accepted without hesitation. Meanwhile, the updates began rolling in from inside Redwood Diagnostics. One message read, "Derek's calling you a social climber. Says the company's better off without the legacy voices." Another said, "They replaced you with a team from Singapore. No single liaison, just rotating names." I read them all without flinching. I knew Derek's type. When things fell apart, he'd never blame the decisions he made. He'd rewrite the story and paint people like me as the problem. But Derek never understood the language of patience, or loyalty, or consequence. Not yet, anyway. That Monday evening, as the streetlights cast their glow over rain-soaked pavement, I poured a cup of Earl Grey and opened my laptop. I double-checked the time difference between Phoenix and Shenzhen, reviewed a few notes I'd bookmarked on evolving contract etiquette in Southeast Asia. Small details, the kind of things Derek's shiny new hires probably dismissed as old school. But in international business, what's old is usually what holds. I didn't make calls. I didn't send a warning. Storms don't announce themselves with thunder right away. They gather slowly, and then they break everything wide open. The next morning started with the usual corporate performance: bad coffee press suits, buzzwords rehearsed into exhaustion. At Redwood Diagnostics, a group of executives gathered on the 15th floor, waiting for what they believed was just another signature meeting. Eastern Dynamics was due to arrive at 10 Undro a.m. On the table, a 3-year partnership renewal worth over $20 million. This deal wasn't just important. It was foundational, the kind of agreement that stabilized quarterly earnings, but more importantly, maintained Redwood's global credibility. Derek sat at the head of the sleek glass conference table, tapping a branded pen against his leather notebook. On either side of him sat Mason and Tracy, his latest fast-track hires. Bright, energetic, and wildly unprepared for international negotiation. Across the city, in the polished third-floor office of Whitman and Hale, I sat with a cup of coffee, cool and composed, watching the rain trace patterns on the window. I didn't need to check the clock. I knew what was coming. At exactly 10 a.m., Eastern Dynamics arrived. Mr. Liang, their VP of International Affairs, along with 2 senior delegates, stepped into the Redwood boardroom with quiet authority. No small talk, no smiles. Derek jumped to his feet, all charm and salesmanship. "Welcome, gentlemen. We're thrilled to have you." The delegation offered stiff handshakes. No bows, no warmth. The room shifted formality, sharpening every breath. Derek launched into his deck. Buzzwords, metrics, efficiency, slides. He didn't pause for reaction, didn't wait for translation. And then, Mr. Liang raised his hand, halting Derek mid-sentence, his face unreadable. "We would like to speak with Ms. Elaine Monroe." Mr. Liang set his tone polite but firm. The room froze. Derek's rehearsed smile flickered, then cracked. A shadow passed over his face. "Elaine." "Right," he stammered. "Ms. Monroe is no longer with Redwood. We've transitioned to a more streamlined communication structure." "Very efficient." Mr. Liang exchanged a glance with his colleagues. None of them spoke. The silence expanded thick and deliberate. Finally, Mr. Liang's voice cut through calm and exact. Ms. Monroe was not merely a translator. She was our strategic counterpart. She understood not only our language, but our needs, our expectations, our business philosophy. He paused. "Without her, I'm afraid we must reconsider the future of this agreement." Derek chuckled lightly, a hollow sound. "I assure you, sir, our new team is more than capable. Our processes are actually even more." Mr. Liang raised a hand, not abrupt but final. The room went dead quiet. "You have made a serious mistake," he said bluntly. "Letting Ms. Monroe go demonstrates a lack of cultural awareness, and more importantly, a lack of respect." Derek's ears reddened. I understand your position, but I believe in modernization. We're moving fast, adapting to." Mr. Liang stood, and his delegation followed. "There will be no renewal of the contract at this time," he said, voice even, but unshakable. "We value continuity. We value respect. You've shown us neither." Without another word, the three men turned and walked out, heels echoing sharply against the tile. Derek sat there stunned. Mason nervously minimized the presentation slides. Tracy whispered something about circling back later, but everyone in that room knew it was over. By midday, the building buzzed with whispers. The $22 million agreement was dead. The CFO called an emergency board meeting before noon. Investors started making noise. Department heads scrambled to rewrite contingency plans. Derek tried to spin it, blamed unexpected cultural misalignment, claimed Eastern dynamics had been rigid. He even hinted the Singapore-based agency had dropped the ball. And yet, the truth seeped through. Word spread fast. He called Elaine outdated, someone muttered. He thought a contractor could replace 21 years of trust. Across town, I finished a video call, took a sip of tea, and smiled. I hadn't lifted a finger. And the collapse had only just begun. The next few days at Redwood Diagnostics unfolded like a controlled demolition in slow motion. The failed Eastern Dynamics renewal had sent tremors through the building, and the aftershocks kept coming. One by one, other international partners began to voice their concerns. Some paused negotiations, others postponed key meetings. A few smaller contracts simply disappeared, quietly terminated with cold, polite emails. Derek's once iron grip on the company began to crack. The confidence, the spin, the flash, it all started to look like posturing. And his next-gen hires, they floundered. They weren't trained for nuance. They didn't understand diplomacy. They certainly didn't know how to rebuild what took me 21 years to construct. Morale cratered. Departments that once ran like clockwork now tiptoed through each day waiting for more bad news. Managers whispered in corners. Staff started printing out resumes again. Rumors spread about budget cuts and emergency board meetings. It was almost too easy to watch. Thursday morning, just 4 days after the Eastern Dynamics debacle, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Half an hour later, it rang again. This time, the caller ID flashed with an old office extension I hadn't seen in weeks. Curious, I picked up. "Elaine, Derek here," he said, voice artificially upbeat. "Hope you're doing well." I leaned back in my chair and smiled. "I'm very well, thank you." "Listen," he said quickly, almost stumbling over himself. "I was thinking, maybe we could talk. Clear the air, possibly collaborate again." "Collaborate," I echoed dryly. Yes, yes. There were hiccups, transitional turbulence, he said. But I think we could reintegrate your expertise. Nothing formal, maybe a consulting arrangement. Quiet, supportive, just a bit of guidance. In other words, he wanted the work without the accountability. My insight without my title. My results without his admission of failure. I let the silence stretch long enough to make him squirm. I'd of course compensate your time, he added quickly, mistaking my pause for hesitation. I considered my response. I could have hung up. Could have let him drown in the storm he made. But something sharper stirred inside me. Let's meet, I said. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. My office. Derek exhaled, relieved. Fantastic. See you then. I ended the call without another word. That evening, as Phoenix slipped into dusk and the street lamps cast golden reflections across wet sidewalks, I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of tea cooling beside me, and carefully considered my next move. Derek wanted help, but without humility. He wanted a lifeline without acknowledging he was drowning. He would regret asking. The next morning, I dressed with quiet precision. A simple navy sheath, understated earrings, and a neutral expression I'd perfected over years in boardrooms where women were often heard last. Derek arrived 10 minutes late, just enough to suggest he was still in control, still playing from strength. He wore the same designer watch, but the man beneath it had changed. The confidence in his stride now looked rehearsed, cracked at the edges. "Elaine?" he said, walking into the glass-walled meeting room like we were old friends. "Good to see you." I shook his hand. Brief cool, and gestured to the chair across from me. He launched into his pitch immediately, his voice smooth but brittle. He framed it as an opportunity, mutual benefit, temporary misalignment, navigating turbulence. Never once did he say the word failure. His pride wouldn't allow it. I let him finish. My face gave him nothing. Finally, he leaned forward, hands open. We just need someone familiar to step in. Rebuild some bridges. No formalities, just practical support? I let the silence hang. You're offering me a consulting role, I said slowly. No authority, no credit, no correction to the lies you let linger after I left. Derek flushed. It's not personal, Elaine. It's business. I smiled sharp and thin. So is my answer. He blinked. I don't understand. I'll consider your offer, I said calmly, but on my terms. He hesitated. What terms you'll see, I said, standing to end the meeting. Because I wasn't there to rescue him. I was there to make sure he and everyone else saw exactly what happened when you underestimated the woman holding the foundation together. Revenge, when done right, is never loud. It's deliberate, precise, and patient. That weekend, I made my plan. I wouldn't barge in demanding justice. That wasn't power. Power was walking back into Redwood under a short-term consulting contract Derek barely skimmed before signing. No title, no announcement. Perfect. No press release, no welcome banner, just a quiet consulting agreement and access to select internal systems. Derek thought he was using me. He thought wrong. The office didn't feel the same. The warmth, the casual banter, the quiet confidence of people who trusted their footing, gone. In its place was fragile silence, punctuated by tense whispers and performative smiles. The entire floor felt like it was holding its breath. Derek greeted me in the lobby with loud, exaggerated warmth. "Elaine, welcome back." He said it too loudly, like a man trying to prove something to everyone watching. A few employees glanced up from their desks. I gave him a polite smile and followed him down the hall. He led me to a glass cubicle, tucked between departments, temporary and personal, and just transparent enough to remind everyone I was being watched. Perfect. By noon, I had access to the client portal. By 3 p.m., I placed a private call, not through Redwood's channels, of course. I dialed the number Mr. Liang had given me years ago when trust was still the currency of our partnership. He answered on the second ring. "Ms. Monroe?" he said warmly, though, with a tinge of cautious curiosity. "To what do I owe this honor?" I responded in Mandarin, slow, clear, respectful. "I owe you an apology," I said gently, "for my abrupt departure. and for the confusion that followed. There was a long pause. "I understand," he replied. "Circumstances are not always within our control. Sometimes they are," I said softly. "Sometimes they're just poor judgment." Another pause. "Are you calling on behalf of Redwood?" "No," I answered. "I'm calling because I believe you deserve the truth." I told him everything, plain unembellished. The way I'd been pushed out. The way they reduced our relationship to a cost metric. The way every warning I gave was ignored. He listened in silence. Finally, he asked, "Where are you now?" "Whitman and Hale Global Advisors. We specialize in international partnerships. With respect. With transparency." He chuckled low and knowing. "Perhaps it is time we speak to new partners." "I leave that to your wisdom," I replied. "But I'd be honored to work with you again." We ended the call with careful goodbyes. And just like that, the first stone was removed from beneath Derek's crumbling foundation. Derek, meanwhile, was still stumbling through the wreckage, trying to patch holes with spreadsheets and buzzwords, unaware that the future he was so desperate to salvage was slipping inch by inch into my hands. It wasn't revenge anymore. Not rage. Not even anger. It was justice. Delivered quietly. Deliberately. And it was almost done. Companies don't collapse in explosions. They erode slowly at first, then all at once. A week after Eastern Dynamics severed ties with Redwood Diagnostics, the ripple began. Small vendors shortened their payment terms. One of our mid-tier European clients froze contract talks indefinitely, citing stability concerns. Inside Redwood's walls, the atmosphere curdled from tense to outright panicked. Employees walked faster, spoke less. Managers, once proud of their leaner models, started scheduling last-minute strategy sessions behind closed doors. Layoffs returned, stripped of euphemism. No more realignment, no more streamlining, just empty desks and cardboard boxes. Derek clung to the illusion of control. He called endless meetings. He rambled about resilience, pivoting modernization. He blamed the market, the agencies, cultural rigidity. Everyone but himself. Meanwhile, I was meticulous. I reached out indirectly, carefully, to 2 other international partners I once managed. I didn't make offers. I didn't criticize Derek. I simply reminded them through the right channels that Whitman and Hale valued continuity, that we didn't see relationships as cost centers. It didn't take much. By the second Friday, 2 more major contracts quietly disappeared from Redwood's books. I started getting emails. Not from Derek, but from his executive assistant. Vague requests for help, advice, a quick call if I had a moment. It might have been amusing if it weren't so sad. Late that afternoon, I received a formal memo from Redwood's CFO. All new business initiatives were being temporarily suspended. Translation: they were hemorrhaging. I closed my laptop, leaned back and exhaled. It was time. Monday morning, I requested a meeting with Derek. He agreed almost instantly, anything that looked like salvation. We met in the same sterile conference room where he'd once offered me a nameless consulting gig. He looked worse now. Pale, sleepless, still wearing that expensive watch, but it couldn't hide the desperation in his eyes. "Elaine," he said, forcing a smile, "I'm really glad you reached out. We need your insight now more than ever. Maybe we can turn this corner together." Derek said, his voice almost pleading beneath the forced optimism. I raised a hand and cut him off. "I'm not here to advise you," I said evenly. He blinked, thrown off. "Then, why I'm here to tell you," I said, leaning in slightly, "that this is the end." A flicker of something panic maybe flashed behind his eyes. He opened his mouth again, but I didn't give him the chance. "You fired me without knowing what I did," I said, calm but unrelenting. "You replaced me with a contractor you didn't vet. You called me a social climber, told the board you didn't need me." His shoulders shifted. He looked smaller in that moment. "You were wrong," I continued, voice low and steady. "Elaine," he muttered, trying to rally. "You don't understand. I'm the reason Eastern Dynamics pulled out. I didn't blink. No, I am." He froze. "I'm the reason Whitman and Hale is signing the clients you're losing. The reason your foundation is crumbling. His mouth opened slightly. Color drained from his face. You did this? I didn't sabotage anything, I said coolly. I just reminded our former partners what respect looks like. They made their own decisions. He stared at me stunned, trying to piece together the wreckage. I calmly gathered my folder and stood. I didn't come back to save you, I said, letting the truth hang in the air like smoke. I came back to make sure you saw exactly who dismantled your little empire. Derek stood shakily, his hands trembling at his sides. You'll regret this, he said, voice rasping with frustration and fear. I smiled. Really smiled for the first time in a long while. It wasn't spiteful. It was satisfaction. No, I said, stepping back. You will. And with that, I walked out of the room, no farewell, no glance back. Not at the office, not at Derek, not at the shell of a company crumbling under its own arrogance. Some endings don't need explosions. Sometimes it's enough to walk away, while the fire they lit devours everything they thought they owned. If you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or told you were no longer needed, then you already know how much restraint it takes to stay silent and rise anyway. I didn't burn that company down. They handed me the matches and drenched the floors themselves. But I made sure they saw who lit the final spark. If you believe in quiet strength and earned respect and the kind of justice that doesn't need to scream, leave me a comment. Share your story. Tell me what you would have done. And most importantly, never let someone else define your worth.